Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us. We are gathered here today on Treaty 6 territory, and I'd like to acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who share a very deep connection to this land. In the last election, Albertans were sold a bill of goods when Danielle Smith and the UCP promised to deliver affordability measures and to also fix our healthcare system. That's because she's broken these promises at the very first opportunity. Today's budget did not deliver the affordability that families need. It did not deliver any plan on how to fix the chaotic mess the UCP has made of our healthcare, or address the crushing pressures the UCP have put on our schools. And what's worse, this budget proves that while Albertans acutely understand inflation, Danielle Smith does not. Smith's own budget numbers say inflation and population are at 6.2%, but services are stalled at 3.9%, if that. That means for everyday Albertans, services just won't be there when they're needed. Now, heading into 2024, the UCP's fiscal plan was already setting us well down the path to a failing healthcare system, overcrowded classrooms, skyrocketing insurance and utility costs, and zero relief for families in their household budgets. Put another way, heading into this budget, business as usual was not actually a goal for anybody. And falling behind business as usual, even less so. Now, she promised you'd have more money in your pocket, but that is not the case today. She broke her number one promise of the last campaign, and we've had it confirmed that her future revenue projections do not include allowance for the tax cut in the next 3 years. At every turn, Danielle Smith and the UCP are breaking their promises to Albertans at a time when families need help the most. This budget is simply not built on the foundation that will deal with the major issues facing the province. A growing province needs a government that is focused on increasing the basic services that people rely on, like healthcare. Albertans deserve to know that if they're injured or they get ill, they can get care at a hospital close to them. They deserve to know that if their mom is sick, they can bring her to a family doctor. Instead, Albertans have a government that risks families' help with their ideological plan to contract out lab services to private services, resulting in at least a $97 million public bailout of a private company. Instead, this budget fails to staff up hospitals and health facilities with the very staff who are crucially required. Just to keep up with population growth, let alone the profound shortages our hospitals face, this government would need to plan to hire an additional 2,800 staff in healthcare. Yet, this budget is planning for less than a third of that. Any Albertan who's been in hospital knows that they are in crisis. Yet AHS, which is still responsible for managing hospitals, actually received only a 1.3% increase. This when population and inflation is at 6.2. Hospital care will not be improving under that scenario. On top of that, Danielle Smith completely broke her promise to Edmontonians by cancelling the South Edmonton Hospital, but only after spending at least $29 million on a partially dug hole. There is no money in the budget for an Airdrie or North Calgary hospital, and honestly, I really have to wonder where the funding is to actually staff the new Calgary Cancer Centre, given the limited spending increase provided to AHS. Now, turning to education, let's start first with the bricks and mortar. The UCP has already been significantly behind in building the schools we need in the province, and today's budget offers no significant investment to address this shortfall. Albertans expect that their kids will have a desk to sit in at school, not have them crammed in a music room with 37 other students. We know that there are 28,000 additional students entering our schools every year. But this government is only planning to build enough spaces for these students over 3 years. 28,000 a year, 30,000 new spaces in 3 years. Put another way, it's just under 1/3, or just over 1/3 of what is required. Now, when it comes to operating our schools, Albertans expect their kids' education will be properly funded every year. Instead, this government has reduced Alberta from being one of the top funded provinces per student in the country to the lowest in the country. And that's not me saying that, that's the Fraser Institute. And nothing in this budget will change that. The base operating grant for schools has actually gone down this year. And the learning support funding envelope has essentially flatlined. What that means is that with our population exploding and classroom complexity already being in crisis, and as kids arrive in our schools from war-torn regions all over the globe, we are doing nothing to make the situation better. Let me be clear. Strong public education matters to Alberta parents and Alberta kids. It also matters to business owners and people concerned about future economic growth. In short, this government is creating a debt that we will be paying for generations. Speaking of paying for things, Albertans remain very concerned about the affordability issues. Now, we've already talked about how Danielle Smith has broken her flagship affordability promise, but wait, there's more. She's replaced her promised tax cut with a suite of new ways to make life more expensive for everyday Albertans. For those Albertans who can actually afford to buy a home, she's now going to make sure that costs you $550 more. They're also going to be moving forward, as I said, with these fees at a time when Albertans actually need relief the most. And for those who are renters, the rent supplement program was actually increased to provide support for an extra 500 Albertans. At a time when Albertans are facing the fastest rent increases in the country. It's absolutely shameful. Meanwhile, if you're looking to get some training or go to college or university, post-secondary fees are actually going to be going up by more than $200 million over what was budgeted last year. Newcomers looking to make Alberta home will see a fee increase of $340. At the end of the day, Danielle Smith has chosen to increase fees to buy a home over tax relief for your family that she promised. She chose funding private surgeries over building public hospitals and hiring enough nurses to staff them. She chose crowded classrooms over new schools and the teachers that need to be inside them. This budget will not support a vibrant and growing Alberta. It will not support new jobs, and it will not support the people we're trying to bring here to fill them. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, as would Shannon or Samir.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll start with questions over here in person.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Over there.
Sorry
Yes.
about that.
Sorry, quick question for the leader, Shailan Skolsky with CTV News here in Edmonton. I'm just hoping you can comment on the fact that we're reporting the surplus of $367 million while still borrowing billions in the years to come, and the province insisting that it's not actually a deficit.
No, I mean, this is a sleight of hand, shell game, bait and switch of a budget. The bottom line is this: we all know they're playing around with the money in order to create a short-term investment in the Heritage Trust Fund to distract from the fact that she promised Albertans a tax cut. Now, I'll be honest, we could all tell in the last election that that tax cut was going to be tough to handle, tough to fund, but we didn't make that promise to Albertans. She did. And now what she's done is she's broken it. And this whole moving around of a pretend surplus and a pretend investment into the Heritage Trust Fund while creating a larger debt, it's just that. It's showmanship to distract from a broken promise.
We'll go to our next question.
Hi, Leader. Brianna Carson-Smith with Global Edmonton. In the budget, 2026-27 is when we're expecting to see those promised tax cuts. It's also when we'll go back to the billion-dollar surpluses. Any coincidence that that's when the next election is?
Well, I think even before we get to that coincidence, we have to understand that officials told us that nowhere in the out years is there a projection for the tax cut. So when you look at their projected revenue, they are not looking at a place where that tax cut has been accounted for. So yeah, we may see it before the next election. We may not. We just really don't know.
I also want to ask you about the Heritage Fund. Premier was really marketing this budget as one that would invest in that fund. We could live off of it for years to come after 2050. We're only seeing $2 billion put into it in this budget. That's surplus from last year, and then no additional funding in the rest of the budget. Is it likely that we're going to be able to live off of this fund at that rate?
Listen, this is a premier who could not keep a promise for 8 months. And she literally expects us to believe her commitment for something that's going to happen 26 years from now? Come on.
Hi, Rachel. It's Lisa from the Edmonton Journal. On the healthcare restructuring, we didn't get a whole lot of new details about the costing or what exactly that's going to lead to. But government officials said essentially the $85 million cost that's been projected to pay for that restructuring is essentially going to pay for itself with newfound efficiencies. What's your reaction to that?
First of all, the idea of taking an organization and creating 5 organizations out of it and having to hire a whole bunch of new people and write a whole bunch of new job descriptions and come up with a whole bunch of new boards and fill a whole bunch of new offices, not to mention increasing the minister's support services budget by 35%, that doesn't sound like an efficiency to me. That sounds like a distraction from the fact that they don't have an answer for the fact that they're starving our healthcare system and Albertans aren't getting the healthcare that they or their loved ones need when they need it.
And yeah, just to go back to that issue of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund and debt repayment, the minister said today that with this very slim surplus, he was obviously asked about that. He said that essentially you would need a $3 billion surplus just to be able to do the debt repayment and have a balanced budget. I mean, what's your reaction to that? I mean, what do you make of his accounting of that fact?
Listen, I think their accounting overall is incredibly fast and loose. They're trying to create a narrative out of numbers that doesn't actually reflect the black and white of the numbers. They've made a number of assumptions that are somewhat questionable in terms of their revenue, and they've just, bottom line, they're not being frank with Albertans. And so they're telling a story, but it's just a story. It's not real. Albertans can do the math, and our debt's going up this year, and our healthcare is not keeping up with inflation and population growth, and our education system is not keeping up with population growth and inflation, and we still ask people to pay 2/3 the corporate tax that anyone does in any other province. So we're not getting off the royalty roller coaster at all, and these folks don't seem to know how to ride it very well.
We'll do one more in person before we check with the phones.
Hi, Rachel. Way back here. I was wondering what your reaction is to the $200 fee every year for electric vehicles.
Listen, I think that I don't have necessarily a problem with establishing equity between people who drive combustion vehicles and those who do not. I do think that obviously the choice to drive an electric vehicle is an environmentally responsible one, and of course they are already more expensive, but I do understand the issue of the roads. I just find that this is a government that is always keen to make anybody doing anything to reduce emissions pay more or be told they can't do it at all, while at the same time having a very, very hypocritical approach when it comes to other forms of energy. So this seems to be a continuation of that. And of course as well, it's a fee increase. It's just another fee increase. And there's a long list of fee increases embedded and buried in this budget.
So this idea of the spending will be less than population growth and inflation, which means it's a cut then
yes,
to
you bet.
services, right?
Yeah.
Can you actually say that in a sentence for me, please?
Okay. Overall, if you buy that this budget actually represents a 3.9% increase, it is a 2.3% cut because we know the population and inflation is at least 6.2%. I actually think that that's a bit of a conservative projection, but we'll see. I would go further though, because I would say there are key parts of our education budget, key parts of, well, both our healthcare and our education budget that are well below a 3.9% increase. So we're seeing a real cut at a time that we're trying to attract Albertans to Alberta, at a time when provinces all across the country are competing for healthcare workers and investing big time in order to draw those healthcare workers into their provinces. We are cutting. That's what you do if you are a government that doesn't respect or value public health care. And that is what the UCP is.
And a question, actually, a different topic, the Sovereignty Act. That motion is going ahead. Do you see that basically as a distraction? I'm sure you do, to the issues like you're talking about today with the budget.
Oh, I mean, it's a distraction, and of course, the foundation on which that act stands is a challenge to the rule of law, which is a fundamental part of our democracy, and it's illegal, and it's profoundly disrespectful to First Nations people all across this province, and we cannot support anything that is structured on the basis of that piece of legislation.
And we'll just check on the phone lines for any questions. Just a reminder, if you're on the phones, to use *9. If you're on Zoom, to use the raise hand function. And last call for questions in person. And with that, we'll wrap today. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everyone.